Meat eaters do not know how to argue against veganism. In this video, I will teach you how to defend meat eating. At the same time, I hope to help you think more critically about eating meat. I will focus solely on the moral aspect of eating meat as a meat eater myself, which means we want to focus purely on the principles. So now let's see where meat eaters fail with the reasoning. Define animal. This is a problem when it comes to arguments in general. Whenever you ask your interlocutor to define something, at least try to offer alternatives. Instead of just making a demand, say, when you say animal, does it include insects? Does it include any organism? Telling someone you didn't define the word animal, therefore your point is invalid, is not a good way to argue in good faith. Sometimes we genuinely have no clue what the other person means, and then we cannot offer alternatives. But when we are given some explanation, we have to try to communicate fairly. It is more beneficial to eat meat. This argument has different forms. Meat has more protein, meat tastes better, meat is more healthy. The problem with this argument is simple. It doesn't address the moral aspect. Something beneficial for you doesn't make it moral necessarily. Would you justify killing another person instead of eating apples were it beneficial? Usually meat eaters respond with the following: but eating human meat can cause you diseases. This misses the obvious. The question offers a hypothetical where it is beneficial. If the hypothetical says, were it to be beneficial, that means that it takes whatever you said about meat and assigns that quality to the human meat in the hypothetical. If the question provides some hypothetical, you cannot respond to it by dismissing it. Most people's morality would say, no, even if eating human meat had exactly the same effect as beef in taste and in health, I would still not justify killing humans for meat. Which brings me to the next point. Animals have less moral value. This argument is not necessarily inconsistent. The first question is, why do animals have less value? Usually these justifications are offered because they are not human, because they are not intelligent. The questions this raises are: is not being human really relevant? Would you eat a cow with human intelligence? The answer is usually no. People wouldn't justify killing a cow if it's intelligent like a human and can communicate with them. Even though this scenario is fictional, it might show that our principles usually don't really care about the species itself. Another fictional scenario. A wizard swaps a cow and a human in such a way that the cow now has all the memories and knowledge of that human, and vice versa. Is it okay now to eat this cow's body with a human mind? It doesn't matter that those scenarios aren't happening or aren't possible. They show an inconsistency with that meat eater's principles. Is intelligence really relevant? Some people in this world have mental disabilities. Those mental disabilities are so great that they end up less intelligent than a cow. They can't do anything on their own. They are stuck in a wheelchair. Would you think eating them is moral because of that? The classic response would be, no, because they have a family and that would hurt that family. But that only pushes the problem back. Because what if I found one of those people that has no living family member? Would you be okay with eating them? The answer is probably no. If the answer is no, you might not be able to say that intelligence is a factor. If animals have less value, how many cows, for example, would be equal to a human? This is an important question for the next argument. Eating meat is necessary for survival. The first question is, do you really mean survival, or you just mean it's a higher quality of life? Many people would respond with, the absence of meat would tremendously lower my quality of life. That is not the same thing as survival. Survival means not dying. If you can avoid meat without dying, you cannot say it is necessary for survival. But let's assume for a moment that it is necessary for survival. This argument is also short-sighted because if each animal is equal in moral value to one human, that would only justify for that human to eat a maximum of one animal for survival. Otherwise, morally, more animals would outweigh that human. If you find an animal that is equal in worth only a tenth of a human, the problem is the same. You cannot really justify eating more animals than one human of value in total. It is natural for humans to eat meat. This argument has the following forms. It is natural for humans to eat meat. All animals are just part of the food chain. Lions eat meat as well. We are just built for it. Humans have canines. This argument relies on what is natural to justify an action. But also, it is natural to have cognitive biases and harm others irresponsibly. Does that justify those actions in our principles? No. Just because lions would do things we consider terrible, would that nullify the fact we consider those things unjustifiable? No. So our principles cannot justify something by appealing to nature. Those animals would eat us given the chance. This objection fails because typically it goes against our principles. For example, if a child doesn't know any better and would hurt us given the chance, that doesn't justify hurting that child. Children don't know any better because in a sense they are not legally sane. Animals suffer from a similar problem. They just don't know any better. That's how their brain is. We cannot say that it's okay to kill or harm them just because they would do it to us, out of total ignorance. The reason it is not a good justification is because people usually expect someone to make a moral choice if they know better. Keep in mind we are not talking about self-defense. Killing cows is not done in self-defense. But it's okay to kill animals who lived well. This argument fails because if a human lived well, that doesn't justify killing that human. If our principles reject that if X lived well, therefore we can kill X for food, we cannot use that principle for animals. I call this argument the kind slave owner. Imagine a slave owner who says, "My slaves are treated better than your usual slaves." This doesn't justify slavery. In the same way, treating animals better doesn't necessarily justify killing them for food. Plant lives also matter. If plants have comparable moral value to animals or humans, there is only a limited amount of plants you may eat. If 10 plants equal 1 human morally, that would justify only eating 10 plants for survival and no more. If both animal and plant lives matter, then not only the amount of plants you're allowed to eat for survival is limited, but that would just apply even to animals. And that would mean the total moral value of animals and plants that you eat must not surpass the moral value of 1 human, because otherwise you are causing more death than your moral worth to justify your own survival. In other words, the total sum of those would outweigh your moral value. So, as meat eaters, what should we say to remain consistent? It is simple. Regardless of if morality is subjective or not, it is arbitrary. There must be a point where we make some assumption. There is no universal neutral arbiter to say which moral system is better. In fact, even the concept of better can be debated on. Here's my proposal. Moral consideration applies only to the following: animals which are legally sane, animals which come from largely legally sane species. This accounts for babies, mentally challenged humans, a single miraculously intelligent cow, intelligent alien species, regular humans. These under this system will not be eaten because either they are legally sane or coming from a largely legally sane species. The same way that I provided bad arguments given by meat eaters, I will now provide bad responses to this system by vegans. Define legal sanity. Just like meat eaters might say, define animal, I would appreciate if you offer some options, but still, I'll try my best to explain. Legal sanity in my argument simply means someone can be held responsible for their actions, because they understand the consequences of their actions in our society. If you don't like the term legal sanity for this, you can call it anything you want. Another objection vegans will raise: legal sanity can vary between countries. But that would be missing the point. The term legal sanity is just a name for a characteristic. The reason I chose that name is just because it reminds me of the legal concept called legal sanity. I didn't choose that name for the purpose of obeying a certain law specifically. The mind and sanity is very undefined. We cannot use that concept for anything. This wouldn't be a good attack, because then we cannot say that humans are of sound mind, and thus we cannot say humans can be held morally responsible for their actions. And you know very well why would a baby not be held morally responsible in the same way an adult would. So, would you harm a dog? If not, that means you're inconsistent. No, I can explain in that system very easily why I would refuse harming a random dog. Since we are empathetic, we have irrational reactions. Whatever is irrational is defined by our principles. We often empathize with fictional characters. That doesn't mean those fictional characters have moral value. If I empathize with a dog to the point I refuse harming it, that doesn't mean I need to assign moral value to that dog. Your system is not generalizable. This argument has two problems. Generalizability is not the ultimate arbiter to assess a moral system. Choosing a moral system is entirely an arbitrary process. We can show that generalizability is not a necessary factor for a moral system. Hypothetically, if it was more generalizable to make racism moral, we would reject that system even if technically it is more generalizable. Generalizability can be considered irrelevant, depends on our priorities. Which brings me to the next objection. You're just making up a system based on your desires. This has two problems. That doesn't create an inconsistency. Isn't it true that when we consider suffering and death as a bad thing, then we make a system based on our own desires to protect whomever we want to protect? Whenever we reason, the very basis for our reasoning anyway rests on things which cannot be explained by reason. We have some arbitrary things we want to achieve with our moral systems, so those are not objections. This should give you, as a meat eater, an idea about how to think about meat eating.